Yeah, that's not too bad. I got it. All right. Okay. Good morning, church. How are you guys? Do you feel like you've recovered from the between Christmas Day and New Year's Day stupor? Because I don't think I have. So we'll see how this goes. All right. So I love that we're doing these songs today. I like a little bit of drums in my worship, as controversial as that might be. Every generation, I think, has a few songs like that encapsulate a facet of what it means to be human so well that they live past the time frame that they were written. I'm sure a few of you guys can think of some of those right now. What are some songs, taking a poll here, what are some songs that you feel like captured an element of the human spirit so well that we're still singing them today, maybe decades after? I think of Let It Be. Yeah? Under Pressure? Yeah. I think there's a... Rockin' in the Free World? Yeah. I would like to think that a few of those have come out in the last 50 or so years. So that first song we sang, Waiting on the World to Change, John Mayer, he's a little bit of a controversial figure, as many artists are, but I do think that there's a bit of that timeless quality to his song, Waiting on the World to Change, which came out in 2006. The song is about a generation of young people who know that something is wrong with the way that the world is, but they feel powerless to make the kind of systemic changes necessary to actually make a change to their world. Now, I don't know if you guys remember 2006. It makes a lot of sense for the early aughts. It's been, at that time, about 5 years since 9/11, and the fear and the grief and the xenophobia that developed from that horrific event. The war in Iraq has been going on for just about 3 years with no end in sight. Mayer even alludes to this in that second verse. Now, if we had the power to bring our neighbors home from war, they would have never missed a Christmas, no more ribbons on their door. And unfortunately, I don't think that feeling of powerlessness and the desperate waiting has really gone away. 2 years after that song debuted was 2008, year I think we all remember, as the beginning of the Great Recession. The landscape of home ownership, careers, and relevant to myself and Lacey and Matt, college educations were changed so drastically that we are still feeling the echoes of those changes today. And even more recently, this last decade has been a period of enormous political and social upheaval. We watched horrified as George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and even earlier, Michael Brown, and Trayvon Martin, and so many more were murdered because of the color of their skin. We've been living through an era of school shootings, climate change, war, and more extreme ideology around the world. The last few years have brought renewed distrust and dehumanization of our LGBTQ siblings. And many of us are sitting in stunned helplessness, waiting on the world to change. It may not be much of a surprise to you to learn that this sense of powerlessness is not new. The powerlessness to stop an enormous system, it's not new. In the beginning of the Bible, God hears the cries, in the second book, God hears the cries of his people in Egypt. Now again in Matthew, he is responding to the cries of powerlessness once more in a new way. And he's left a celestial sign telling people what he's up to. The story behind the Magi is a little bit of a mystery. The account in Matthew is as close as we get to any information. We know that they were called Magi, which essentially means wise man in Greek. We know that they came from the east, and we know that they knew there was a new king of the Jews because they saw his star. If you want my theories about who they were, and also a fun little note about how all our words for magicians basically just means wise guy, come by me during coffee hour. For now, we are just going to focus on one point. The Magi were watching and waiting. I can only speculate on their political place in the world. But the plight of the Jewish people would not be surprising or even particularly unique during this era. The Romans were a colonizing force to be reckoned with. Whether the Magi were watching the skies for their own sakes or on behalf of the Jewish people, they were indeed watching and waiting on the world to change. So what can we learn from these wise men about our own wait? Now, it should probably be said here that I grew up in the evangelical church, so I cut my teeth on the 3-point sermon. I know we don't often do that around here, and for good reason. But today we're going to kick it back to my quasi-Baptist roots with 3 things that we can take from the wise men and their wait. You guys are lucky that they aren't alliterative. So first thing, watch. Waiting without watching is just ignoring. Now, this comes with a caveat. I'm not saying that anyone here should be spending all of their time glued to the 24-hour news cycle. I actually don't think that's very good for us. I also don't think it's super healthy to spend all day doom scrolling, basically just scrolling through like, oh, that's bad, oh, that's bad, oh, that's bad. I don't think that's good for us. But what I am saying is that being able to fully tune out of events and systems that make us uncomfortable is a form of privilege. Throwing up our hands and saying, I just can't watch, is a privilege that is not afforded to our marginalized brothers and sisters. I'm going to stop right here and say that me saying this is in some ways hypocritical. I've done that a little bit over the past few years where I've stuck my head in the sand. And so this is me talking to myself as much as it is talking to everyone else. We may not be able to give our attention to every issue around the world, but we are called to bear witness. We cannot turn away from the poor, the widowed, and the foreigner. The Magi were from the east, the Bible says, not from around here. Yet they were tuned in, paying attention to the celestial events for other places. They weren't only tuned in to what was happening to them personally. What is God calling you to bear witness to? Point 2, be shrewd. So the Magi rock up to Jerusalem and do what you do when you're a foreign dignitary. They make an appointment with the guy in charge. They meet Herod and say, King Herod, the new king of Jews is here and we want to meet him. Now the Bible says that King Herod was frightened and all of Jerusalem with him. This is what us Bible scholars refer to as causing a kerfuffle. I like to imagine that the wise men were pretty clued in when the response to their inquiry was the current king's face draining of all color. I imagine that getting invited back in secret was a clue, especially when Herod began asking them to triangulate the exact location of this new king of Jews. Fortunately, the wise men were paying attention. They were shrewd and did not reveal the location of the baby Jesus when they were warned by God not to. Later on in Matthew, Jesus will tell his disciples to be as shrewd as serpents and as innocent as doves. Now, I'm going to tell a little story, an aside. What do you guys know about Rosa Parks? Now, we know that the classic story, the one that goes into children's books with the really cute little pictures, is that Rosa Parks just decided randomly one day that she was tired, and so she was not going to get up from the seat of the bus. Did you know that that's actually a myth? Rosa Parks was already involved in activism work and was specifically chosen to be on that bus, in that seat, on that day. She was part of a group, and she was being shrewd. It was intended to be a political movement. Now, I think sometimes when things get mythologized, it's easy to feel like, oh, well, now that I know that it's different, that it was on purpose, that it's like takes the magic away. But no, I think it's like a reminder that nothing happens without a little shrewdness, without it being a little bit logistical, a tactician, you know? And so she was chosen by the activist group that she was with to be on that bus that day and affect change. While I identify with the sentiment in Mayor's song, I don't think we're quite as helpless as we often feel. Sometimes bringing about change in the world just requires being smart about our opening and paying attention to the events around you. It's knowing who your government officials are and how to contact them and when to contact them. It's finding out what organizations are already working on a given issue and how you can get involved. Faith, guys, get involved with faith. Sometimes it's even knowing when to shut up and let someone else talk, which is admittedly difficult for me. Point 3, bring your gifts. The Magi did not show up to the new king of Jews empty-handed. They came with some really fancy gifts to honor the newborn. Truly the best of the best for this baby. The modern day equivalent would be showing up to a baby shower with a Ferrari for the baby. While I don't think we necessarily need to emulate the wise men to that degree, I do think that God is calling us to use our very best gifts and our time and our resources to be his ambassadors of change on the earth. There will come a time when God calls us out of our waiting and our watching. He will call us to move toward being the change makers the world has been waiting on. We have to be ready to use our gifts when that time comes. It is really easy to feel like the business of change is somebody else's responsibility. It's for somebody older, somebody younger, somebody more powerful or more persuasive. And to that I have a couple of things to say. Change is made by ordinary people. David was a shepherd, the youngest son. Mary and Joseph were a newly engaged couple. Joseph is some kind of laborer. Our local council members are made up of just like people who own businesses or work in our community. I work for the city of Port Orange. Our most recent mayor was a real estate agent. I think about even like some of the people in our state government. Who comes to mind? Matt and I are somewhat running in the same circles as Maxwell Frost. He's a drummer in like hardcore bands and plays Yu-Gi-Oh cards, which is super nerdy. Like he's just a guy. We're all just people, and change is made by ordinary people. The second thing is that change is made with other people. Not a single one of us is responsible for making all of the change. And when we can get ourselves out of that mindset of like, it's on me and only on me, and start thinking about, okay, like what is the little tiny piece of the puzzle? What's the couple stitches in this tapestry that I am responsible for? It becomes a lot more approachable to make change. And also like approach it with a little humility. Again, talking to myself. We're not called to make every big change ever, but maybe just a small change. Maybe it's just you writing an email to your representative about an issue, or you providing food to someone who needs it, or participating in mutual aid. So all that to say, John Mayer's song is extremely relatable from back in that day until present, but don't wait forever. Don't wait forever for the world to change. At some point, we have to bear witness, we have to be shrewd, and we have to bring our gifts to be ambassadors of God's change. Thank you. All right, so